Lighthouse keepers log everything: weather, ships passing, equipment checks, every detail, every shift, every night. James Crawford had been keeping logs for 15 years, never missed an entry. November 3rd, 1996. His last log entry, 11:47 p.m., visibility poor, fog rolling in, hear something below, checking now. The entry stopped mid-shift. The next morning, the lighthouse was still running, light sweeping the coast, foghorn sounding every 2 minutes, everything automated, everything working. But James Crawford was nowhere. His relief keeper found the log, read that final entry. Hear something below. Below what? Below the lighthouse? The foundation? For 23 years, that question haunted everyone who knew James. Then, Hurricane Emily answered it in 2019, tore open the lighthouse foundation, and revealed a hidden chamber no one knew existed, with evidence that explained exactly what James heard that night and why he never wrote another log entry. If you're new here, this isn't fiction. This is real. A lighthouse keeper vanished in 1996. His daughter spent 23 years searching the ocean, but he was never in the water. He was in the lighthouse, sealed behind brick. Hit subscribe before we continue, because what that hurricane revealed will change everything. Drop your location in the comments. Let's see where this story reaches. November 4th, 1996, 6:00 a.m. Thomas Whitmore pulled his truck into the Pemaquid Point parking lot. Early morning shift change, same as every Monday. He was the assistant keeper, spelled James on weekends. They'd worked together 3 years, had a routine down. James did Sunday nights. Thomas took over Monday mornings, simple, professional, never any problems. Thomas grabbed his thermos, walked toward the lighthouse. The beam was still turning. Good. Fog had cleared overnight. Better. He climbed the stairs, called out, "James, coffee's on!" No answer. Thomas reached the watchroom, the main level where keepers worked. The light above was operating perfectly, lens rotating, beam cutting through dawn, but the room was empty. Coffee sat on the desk, still in the mug, cold now. The logbook lay open, James's handwriting clear. Thomas read the last entry. 11:47 p.m. Hear something below, checking now. Thomas frowned. Below? Below where? He checked the lens room, empty. Checked the storage level, empty. Checked outside on the rocks, nobody. James's truck was still in the lot, his jacket hung on the hook. His keys sat in the desk drawer where he always kept them. Everything was here, except James. Thomas called the Coast Guard at 6:23 a.m. By 7 a.m., a search was underway. By noon, it was massive. Coast Guard cutters searched the water. Helicopters swept the coastline. Volunteer teams combed the rocks around Pemaquid Point. The theory was simple. James had gone outside to investigate something, slipped on the wet rocks, fell into the Atlantic. November water in Maine is 48 degrees. You survive maybe 30 minutes. If James had fallen around midnight, he'd been gone for 6 hours. They searched anyway. Divers went down around the point, found nothing. Boats dragged the area, found nothing. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew search patterns, found nothing. For 3 days they searched, found no body, no clothing. No evidence James had been in the water at all. Sarah Crawford arrived from Boston on day 2. She was 23, graduate student at Boston University, marine biology, first year of her master's program. She'd talked to her dad 2 days before he disappeared, Sunday afternoon. He'd called to check in, asked about her research, told her about the fog rolling in, said he loved her, said he'd call again next weekend. That was the last time Sarah heard her father's voice. Now she stood on the rocks at Pemaquid Point, watching search boats. Her father was out there somewhere, had to be. The ocean had taken him, she just had to find where. "We'll keep searching," the Coast Guard commander told her, "as long as there's any chance." But by day 4, they'd searched a 50-square-mile area, found nothing. The commander sat down with Sarah. Delivered the news nobody wants to hear. "Without a body, we can't declare him deceased, but Miss Crawford, the chances of survival after 4 days in November water, I'm sorry. We're scaling back the search." Sarah nodded, didn't cry, not yet. She walked back to the lighthouse, stood in the watchroom. Her father had been here 5 days ago, right here, had written his last words in that logbook. Huh, here's something below. Sarah looked down, at the floor, the foundation beneath. What had he heard? She asked Thomas Whitmore. He'd worked with James for years. Any idea what he meant by below? Thomas shook his head. No clue. Maybe something in the storage level? I checked, though. Nothing out of place. What about under the lighthouse, the foundation? It's solid granite. Been there since 1835. Nothing below except rock. Sarah wanted to believe that, wanted to believe her father had simply fallen, that the ocean had taken him quickly, that he hadn't suffered. But something bothered her about that log entry. James Crawford didn't imagine things, didn't hear phantom sounds. If he wrote that he heard something below, he heard something. The official investigation concluded on November 15th. James Crawford, presumed drowned, body not recovered, likely slipped on wet rocks during his shift, fell into the Atlantic. Common accident for lighthouse keepers. Tragic but not suspicious. Case closed. Sarah returned to Boston, tried to continue her master's program. Couldn't focus, kept thinking about the ocean, about currents and tides and drift patterns, about where a body might go if it entered the water at Pemaquid Point. She made a decision in December 1996, changed her research focus, specialized in Maine coastal dynamics, studied every current, every tide table, every wind pattern, learned everything about where things go when they enter the Atlantic off the Maine coast. It wasn't just academic interest. Sarah was mapping the ocean, searching for her father. She'd spend the next 23 years looking, becoming one of New England's leading marine biologists, publishing papers on coastal currents and drift patterns, every research trip, every dive, every expedition. She was searching for James Crawford. She never found him, because James Crawford was never in the ocean. He was 50 feet from where Thomas Whitmore stood that November morning, sealed behind brick, in a chamber built into the lighthouse foundation, a hidden room from Prohibition days. When smugglers used the lighthouse, a room that had been bricked over in 1933, forgotten, until someone needed a place to hide a body in 1996, and James Crawford became the secret the lighthouse kept. The light kept turning. Every 12 seconds, kept sweeping across the Atlantic, kept warning ships away from the rocks for 23 years, while new keepers worked in the watchroom, while Sarah searched the ocean, while visitors toured the lighthouse and took photos. James was there, the whole time, below. Just like his last log entry said. The lighthouse knew. The foundation held the secret. But it would take a hurricane to finally reveal what happened on that foggy November night, to expose the hidden chamber, to bring James Crawford home, and to reveal the truth about the man who'd killed him. The man who'd stood in that watchroom the next morning, read that log entry. Here's something below, and said nothing. Because Thomas Whitmore knew exactly what James had heard, knew exactly where the body was hidden, had put it there himself. And for 23 years, he'd kept that secret. Worked at the lighthouse for 8 more years after James disappeared, helped with the search, consoled Sarah, attended the memorial service, all while knowing James Crawford was sealed in the foundation beneath their feet. But hurricanes don't keep secrets. Hurricane Emily was coming in September 2019. And when it hit Pemaquid Point, everything buried would finally surface. James Crawford wasn't born wanting to be a lighthouse keeper. He'd been a commercial fisherman first. 20 years working boats out of Portland, lobster, cod, whatever paid, hard work, dangerous work. But he loved the ocean. Then, in 1979, his boat went down in a storm. 3 crew members died. James survived, spent 6 hours in 52-degree water, clinging to debris. Coast Guard helicopter pulled him out, barely alive. He recovered, physically at least, but he never went back to fishing. Couldn't. The ocean had taken too much from him. He needed something different, something on land, but still near the water. That's when he saw the posting. Lighthouse keeper, Pemaquid Point, 1981. He applied, got the job, found his calling. Pemaquid Point Lighthouse sits on a granite promontory, jutting into the Atlantic like a fist. Waves crash against the rocks 24 hours a day. The sound never stops. Some keepers hated it. The isolation, the endless rhythm of water. James loved it. The lighthouse had been built in 1835. White tower, 38 feet tall, light visible for 14 miles. Critical navigation point for ships heading into Muscongas Bay. James learned everything about it, how the lens worked, how the foghorn operated, how the foundation had been built, granite blocks hauled from local quarries, set deep into bedrock, designed to withstand centuries of storms. He was meticulous, kept detailed logs, weather conditions, ships passing, equipment maintenance, everything documented, everything precise. Other keepers were more casual. James wasn't. The lighthouse was his responsibility. Lives depended on that light staying on. He took it seriously. His daughter Sarah was 8 years old when James became keeper. Her mother had died 2 years earlier. Cancer. So it was just the two of them, father and daughter. Sarah grew up at the lighthouse, spent summers exploring the rocks, learning tide pools, watching her father work. She loved it, the ocean, the wildlife, the rhythm of lighthouse life. By the time she was 16, she knew she wanted to study marine biology. James encouraged it, helped her apply to colleges, took extra shifts to save money for tuition. Sarah went to Boston University in 1991, came home summers and holidays, always back to the lighthouse, back to her father. They were close. The kind of close that happens when it's just two people. When you've survived loss together and built a life from what remained. James was proud of her. His daughter, the scientist, told everyone at the lighthouse about her research, about the papers she was publishing, the conferences she attended. Sarah was proud of him too, her father, the keeper, the man who kept the light burning, who saved lives just by being there. By November 1996, James had been at Pemaquid Point for 15 years, longer than any keeper in the previous 50 years. He knew that lighthouse better than anyone. Every sound it made, every way the wind hit the tower, every crack in the granite, every loose stone. Which is why what happened on November 3rd made no sense. James started his shift at 6 p.m. Sunday. Standard rotation, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Thomas Whitmore was his assistant, had been for 3 years. Thomas did weekends sometimes, spelled James when needed. They had a professional relationship, not friends exactly, but cordial. Thomas was 34. 10 years younger than James, had drifted through various jobs, fishing boats, construction, took the assistant keeper position in 1993. James had trained him, taught him the routines. Thomas was competent, showed up on time, did his job. James didn't have complaints. That Sunday, Thomas finished his weekend shift at 6 p.m. James arrived to take over. They did the handoff, brief conversation, weather report, fog expected overnight, equipment status, everything operational, ships scheduled, none in the area tonight. Thomas left. James began his shift. By 8 p.m., James had completed his initial rounds, checked the lens, verified the foghorn was ready, made coffee, settled into the watchroom. The lighthouse at night was peaceful. Just James and the light and the sound of waves. He liked night shifts, the solitude, the focus. By 10 p.m., fog had started rolling in, thick, the kind that swallows sound. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. James activated the foghorn, 2 blasts every 2 minutes, warning ships away from the rocks. He logged it, 10:17 p.m., fog conditions, horn active, visibility poor, everything routine. By 11 p.m., the fog was thicker. James could barely see the rocks from the watchroom window, just white, pressing against the glass. The lighthouse beam cut through it. Every 12 seconds, sweep of light, then fog again. James made coffee, his 3rd cup of the shift, checked the equipment logs, everything running perfectly. He sat at the desk, opened his logbook, started to write the 11 p.m. entry. That's when he heard it, a sound, below, not outside, not the wind or waves, below. Under the lighthouse. James stopped writing, listened. There it was again, muffled, like something moving, metal scraping stone. He stood, walked to the window, looked down, couldn't see anything through the fog. The sound came again, definitely below, in the foundation. James frowned. That didn't make sense. The foundation was solid granite. No rooms, no spaces, just rock. But he heard something, clear as day. He went to the logbook, wrote, 11:47 p.m., visibility poor, fog rolling in, hear something below, checking now. James grabbed his flashlight, heavy metal maglite. He'd had it for years, always kept it charged. He opened the door to the lower level. The stairs spiraled down, stone steps, built into the tower. The light from above didn't reach far, just a few steps visible. Then, darkness. James descended. Flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The stairs were narrow, curved tight. His footsteps echoed. He reached the storage level. Shelves with supplies, paint, tools, foghorn equipment, everything in its place. Nothing moved. The sound came again. Closer now, below this level, in the foundation itself. James walked to the far wall. Granite blocks, massive, ancient. The sound was coming from behind them. That made no sense. There was nothing behind these walls, just more granite, bedrock. James ran his hand along the stones, feeling for... what? A crack? A gap? His fingers found something, a seam, where mortar had crumbled. He leaned closer, shined his flashlight into the gap. Cold air, coming from inside the wall. There was a space back there, a void. James's heart rate picked up. This wasn't right. He looked closer. The stones here were different, newer mortar, different color than the rest of the foundation. Someone had bricked up an opening, and recently, within the last few decades at least. James stepped back, thinking. An opening into the foundation, sealed over. But why? When? And what was making that sound? He heard footsteps above, on the stairs, someone coming down. James turned, pointed his flashlight up. Thomas. Thomas Whitmore appeared on the stairs, still wearing his jacket like he'd just arrived. Hey, James, forgot my thermos, came back for it. James frowned. You heard it too, the sound? Thomas came down the last few steps. What sound? Below, in the foundation, like something moving. Thomas looked at the wall. His expression changed, just for a second. Something flickered across his face. Fear? Guilt? Then it was gone. Back to normal. Probably just the building settling. Old granite makes noise. No, James said. This was different. And look. He pointed to the stones, the newer mortar. Someone bricked up an opening here. You know anything about that? Thomas was quiet. Too quiet. James turned to look at him. That's when he saw the crowbar in Thomas's hand. Thomas? What? Thomas swung. The crowbar caught James across the temple. James dropped, flashlight clattering on stone. His vision exploded white, then red, then dark. He heard Thomas's voice, distant, echoing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But you can't know about this. You can't report it. I'm sorry. James tried to move, couldn't. Tried to speak, couldn't. The darkness pulled him under. The last thing he heard was the foghorn. 2 blasts, every 2 minutes. Warning ships away from the rocks, while 50 feet above his coffee sat cooling on the desk, and his logbook lay open to that final entry. Here's something below, checking now. James Crawford, age 52, lighthouse keeper for 15 years, murdered in the foundation of the lighthouse he'd spent his life maintaining, by the assistant keeper he'd trained and trusted, all because James had heard something he wasn't supposed to hear, and discovered something he wasn't supposed to find. A smuggling operation, running through the lighthouse, using the keeper's schedule, the fog patterns, the isolation. Thomas Whitmore had been moving drugs for 2 years, small runs, using the lighthouse as cover. Boats would time their approaches with the fog, with Thomas's shifts, when he knew exactly where the Coast Guard was looking. It was perfect. Until James heard something. Until James started asking questions. Thomas had panicked, reacted, killed the one man who trusted him. And now he had to hide it, had to make it look like James had simply disappeared. The hidden chamber was already there. Old Prohibition tunnel. Thomas had discovered it months earlier, used it for storage. Now he'd use it for something else. He dragged James's unconscious body to the wall, pried loose the stones, pulled them away, revealed a dark opening, a chamber built into the foundation, 8 feet deep, 4 feet wide, cut into the granite decades ago. Thomas pushed James inside, into the darkness. Then he rebuilt the wall, stone by stone, mortar mixed quickly, applied rough. It didn't have to be perfect, just had to hold. By 2 a.m., the wall was sealed again. James Crawford was gone. By 6 a.m., Thomas would discover him missing, would call the Coast Guard, start the search, would help look for a body he knew would never be found, because the body was right there, beneath the lighthouse, behind the stones, where it would stay for 23 years, until a hurricane tore open the foundation and exposed everything. Sarah Crawford changed her entire life because of a log entry. Here's something below, checking now. Those 6 words became her obsession. Her father had heard something, had gone to investigate, had never come back. The official story said he'd fallen into the ocean. Sarah believed it, for a while. But the more she thought about it, the less sense it made. Her father knew those rocks, had walked them for 15 years, in fog, in storms, in complete darkness. He didn't slip. He didn't fall. He was too careful, too experienced. So where was he? If not in the ocean, then where? Sarah returned to Boston in December 1996, tried to finish her master's degree, but every research paper she read brought her back to the same question. Ocean currents, drift patterns, where do things go when they enter the water? She started calculating. If her father had fallen at Pemaquid Point around midnight, if he'd gone into the water there, where would the current take him? She mapped it, used every model available, factored in tides, wind, temperature. The Gulf of Maine has complex currents. Water moves in patterns most people don't understand. But Sarah learned. She became an expert. By spring 1997, she'd produced a detailed map showing probable drift patterns from Pemaquid Point. If her father had drowned, his body should have washed up somewhere, within days, maybe weeks. The currents should have brought him to shore, or out to deeper water where fishing boats might have found him. But nothing had been found 6 months later. Still nothing. Sarah defended her master's thesis in May 1997, then immediately applied for PhD programs. She got into MIT, full scholarship. Her research proposal, Coastal Drift Patterns and Body Recovery in the Gulf of Maine, academic language for finding my father. She spent the next 4 years diving, researching, mapping every inch of Maine coastline, every cove, every inlet, every place the ocean might deposit something. She worked with Coast Guard, with marine salvage crews, with anyone who understood the water. She found other things, wreckage from boats, lost equipment, even found remains from a fisherman who'd been missing since 1989. But she never found James Crawford. By 2001, Sarah had her PhD. She was 28 years old, one of the youngest marine biologists in New England, and she'd spent 5 years searching for a body that wasn't there. But she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. She took a position at the University of Maine. Research faculty. It gave her access to boats, equipment, funding for coastal research that was really just continued searching. Every summer, every research trip, every expedition, she was looking for her father. Her colleagues thought she was dedicated to science. They were right, but the science had a purpose. Find James Crawford, prove he was in the ocean, bring him home. Meanwhile, at Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, life continued. New keepers came and went. The position changed in 1997, became more automated. Keepers weren't required to stay overnight anymore. Just check the equipment, make sure everything ran. Thomas Whitmore stayed on as assistant keeper until 2004. 8 years after James disappeared, he was there when Sarah visited, which she did, regularly, coming back to the lighthouse. Standing in the watchroom where her father had written his last words, Thomas would talk to her, express sympathy, say he wished he knew what happened, say he thought about James all the time, and Sarah believed him. Why wouldn't she? Thomas had worked with her father, had been there the morning James disappeared, had helped search, had seemed genuinely upset. She'd never suspected, never thought to question. Why would she? The official investigation, said accident. Everyone agreed. James had fallen. The ocean had taken him, case closed. But Sarah kept searching, year after year. The searches became her life. She published papers, built a career, but every expedition had a secondary purpose. Look for James, check the drift models, search one more area. By 2010, she'd searched hundreds of square miles, used sonar, underwater cameras, even worked with salvage divers who went to depths recreational divers couldn't reach. Found nothing. No body, no clothing, no evidence James Crawford had been in the water at all. She started to question the official story. Maybe he hadn't fallen, maybe something else happened. But what? She read the investigation reports. Everything pointed to accidental drowning, the log entry. Here's something below. Investigators thought James had heard something outside, on the rocks below the lighthouse, had gone to check, had slipped. But Sarah kept coming back to that word. Below. Her father was precise. He didn't use words carelessly. If he wrote below, he meant below. Under, beneath, not outside, not on the rocks, below the lighthouse itself. She mentioned this to investigators in 2012, 16 years after her father disappeared. They listened politely, told her the case was closed, told her she needed to accept that sometimes bodies aren't recovered. The ocean doesn't always give back what it takes. Sarah nodded, left the police station, and kept searching. Other keepers at Pemaquid Point started noticing things, strange things. Tools moved overnight, footsteps on the stairs when nobody was there, cold spots in the storage level, even in summer, places where the temperature dropped 20 degrees for no reason. The keepers joked about it. Old James is still here, they'd say, never really left. They meant it as a ghost story, something to tell tourists. But some of them believed it. The lighthouse felt wrong sometimes, especially down in the storage level, near the far wall. Something about that spot made people uncomfortable. One keeper in 2015 mentioned it to Sarah during one of her visits. "Your dad ever complain about cold spots down in the storage area?" Sarah frowned. "No, why? Just weird. That corner by the back wall, always cold. We checked the ventilation, checked for drafts, nothing. Just cold." Sarah filed it away. Didn't think much of it. Old buildings had quirks, temperature variations, nothing supernatural, just physics. But she did walk down to the storage level that day, stood in the spot the keeper mentioned, by the back wall, and yes, it was cold. Noticeably colder than the rest of the room. She ran her hand along the granite blocks, felt the chill coming from the stone itself. She looked closer at the wall. The mortar here was different, newer. Different color than the surrounding foundation she'd never noticed before. Had no reason to. But now that she looked, someone had done repair work here, repointed the stones, but only this section. "Why?" she asked the keeper. He didn't know. Said it had been like that since he started in 2011. Maybe maintenance, maybe weather damage. Old buildings needed repairs, nothing unusual. Sarah took photos, made notes, then left. But something nagged at her. The cold spot, the newer mortar, the location. This was near where her father would have been. If he'd heard something below, if he'd gone down to investigate, this was where he would have stood. She pushed the thought away. She was seeing patterns where none existed, trying to find meaning in random details. Her father had fallen into the ocean. She just hadn't found him yet. That's all. But deep down, a question was forming. One she didn't want to ask. One that seemed impossible. What if her father never made it to the ocean? What if something happened before he got outside? What if below meant something else entirely? She didn't pursue it. Couldn't. The idea was too terrible. That her father had been at the lighthouse the whole time. That 23 years of searching the ocean had been wasted, that she'd been looking in the wrong place. No. It didn't make sense. The investigation had been thorough. They'd searched the lighthouse, searched the grounds, found nothing. James Crawford had fallen into the Atlantic. The evidence supported it. She just needed to keep searching. By 2019, Sarah was 46 years old. She'd spent 23 years searching for her father, half her life. She was respected in her field, published, accomplished. But everyone knew why she'd really become a marine biologist. To search, to find, to bring her father home. She'd accepted she might never find him. The ocean is vast. Bodies can drift for years, decompose, become unrecognizable. Maybe James Crawford would remain one of the missing, one of the thousands who disappear into the water and never return. Then Hurricane Emily hit September 2019, Category 3, winds 145 km, tore through coastal Maine like it was angry at the land itself, destroyed homes, flooded towns, ripped piers apart, and at Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, it did something else. It answered the question Sarah had been asking for 23 years. The hurricane surge hit the Lighthouse foundation with massive force, wave after wave, each one carrying tons of water, slamming into 184-year-old granite. The foundation held. Mostly, but the base, the lowest section, where the granite met bedrock. That's where the damage happened. The waves eroded the mortar, cracked the stones, exposed seams that hadn't been visible in decades. When the storm passed and maintenance crews arrived to assess damage, they found the lighthouse still standing, still functional. But the foundation needed repair, significant repair. Stones had shifted, mortar had washed away, parts of the base were compromised. They brought in structural engineers, started examining the damage. That's when they found it, the sealed chamber. Behind the stones, in the section with the newer mortar, the section that had always been cold, the section where James Crawford had stood 23 years earlier, looking for the source of a sound, before Thomas Whitmore killed him. The engineers didn't know what they'd found at first, just an opening. Behind stones that had come loose in the storm, a dark space cut into the foundation. They shined lights inside, saw something that made them stop. Back away. Call the police, because inside that hidden chamber, sealed behind granite for 23 years, was a body. Still wearing a lighthouse keeper's jacket, still holding a flashlight with batteries long dead. James Crawford, right where he'd been since November 3rd, 1996, 50 feet from where Thomas Whitmore had pretended to search for him, below, just like the log entry said. The call came to Sarah's office at 9:47 a.m., on September 18, 2019, unknown number, Maine area code. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Dr. Crawford, this is Detective Lisa Brennan, Maine State Police. I need you to come to Pemaquid Point, right away. Sarah's stomach dropped. What happened? Is the lighthouse okay? The lighthouse is fine, but we found something. During storm damage assessment, you need to come now. What did you find? The detective was quiet for a moment. Then, we think we found your father. Sarah's hands went numb. 23 years of searching the ocean, and they found him. Where? How? Her mind couldn't process it. Where was he? What beach? What? Dr. Crawford, he wasn't in the ocean. He was in the lighthouse. Please come now. The drive from Orono to Pemaquid Point took 90 minutes. Sarah made it in 65, speeding, not caring. Her father was found, after 23 years. In the lighthouse? That didn't make sense. They'd searched the lighthouse. Day 1. November 4th, 1996. They'd searched every room, every level, found nothing. She pulled into the parking lot. Police cars everywhere, crime scene tape, forensic vans, news crews setting up. Sarah's legs almost gave out getting out of her car. A uniformed officer stopped her. Sorry, ma'am, crime scene, no civilians. I'm Sarah Crawford, Detective Brennan called me. The officer's expression changed, sympathy, pity. He spoke into his radio. A minute later, Detective Brennan appeared, early 40s, professional, but her eyes were kind. Dr. Crawford, thank you for coming. I need to prepare you for what you're about to see. Just show me. Brennan led her toward the lighthouse. Maintenance equipment surrounded the base, scaffolding, lights. The foundation on the south side had visible damage, stones displaced, mortar missing. A section of the base had a large opening, recently made, fresh work. Hurricane Emily damaged the foundation, Brennan explained. Structural engineers came to assess repairs, found something unexpected, a sealed chamber built into the foundation, hidden behind the original stones. We believe it dates to Prohibition era. Smugglers used these lighthouses, built hidden rooms for contraband. Sarah stared at the opening. And my father? Inside. We haven't removed the remains yet. Wanted you to see the scene first. I'm sorry. This is going to be difficult. They walked to the opening. Sarah could see into the chamber now, a space maybe 8 feet deep, 4 feet wide, cut into the granite, and inside, a body, still clothed, decomposed but preserved by the cold, dry space, wearing a jacket Sarah recognized, her father's lighthouse keeper jacket, the one with the Coast Guard patch, the one he'd worn every shift. Sarah's vision blurred. Tears came before she could stop them. 23 years. He'd been here, right here, the whole time, while she searched the ocean, while she built a career looking in the wrong place. He'd been 50 feet from where she'd stood, sealed behind stone. Dead. How? Sarah's voice broke. How did he get in there? We don't know yet, but Dr. Crawford, this wasn't an accident. Someone sealed him in. This is a homicide investigation now. Sarah turned to look at Brennan. Someone killed him? Who? That's what we need to determine. Can you identify the remains, definitively? Sarah looked back at the chamber, at her father's body, after 23 years. Yes, that's him. That's my dad. She pointed to the jacket. That patch, I sewed it on for him in 1995 when it started coming loose. That's his jacket. That's James Crawford. Brennan made notes. We'll need dental records for official confirmation, but given the location and clothing, we're confident this is your father. I'm very sorry. Sarah couldn't stop staring. Her father had been here the entire time. While Thomas Whitmore expressed sympathy, while new keepers walked above, while tourists visited, while she searched hundreds of miles of coastline, he'd been here in the dark, alone. The log entry, Sarah said, his last log entry. Here's something below. He meant this. He heard something in this chamber. Came down to investigate. Someone put him in there. Brennan nodded. We found something else, inside the chamber. A second logbook. Personal notes your father kept, separate from official logs. The last entry is dated October 28, 1996, 1 week before he disappeared. He wrote about seeing lights offshore, at night, no scheduled ships, a pattern. He suspected smuggling, was planning to report it. Sarah's mind raced. Smuggling, using the lighthouse. Her father had discovered something, someone's illegal operation, and they'd killed him for it, sealed him in this chamber to keep him quiet. Who knew about this chamber? Sarah asked. Who would have known it was here? That's what we're investigating. The chamber was sealed in the 1930s, after Prohibition ended, but someone reopened it, recently. Within the last few decades, the mortar is newer. Someone found this space, used it, and when your father discovered it, they used it again, for murder. Sarah felt rage building. 23 years, someone had known, had kept this secret, had let her search the ocean, had watched her waste her life looking in the wrong place. Who was working at the lighthouse when my father disappeared? Thomas Whitmore, assistant keeper. He's the one who reported your father missing. He's also the one who... Where is he? Sarah's voice was hard. Where is Thomas Whitmore? California, retired. We've already contacted local police. He's being brought in for questioning. The forensic team began documenting the scene, photographing the chamber, the body, every detail. Sarah watched from outside the tape, unable to look away. This was her father. This was where he'd been, where he'd died, alone in the dark, sealed behind stone. One of the forensic techs emerged from the chamber, holding an evidence bag. Inside was a flashlight. Detective, found this with the body, heavy-duty mag light. Batteries are dead, but the casing is intact. Sarah recognized it. That's his. He carried that flashlight for years, never went anywhere without it. She paused. He was holding it. When he was sealed in, he was alive. Brennan looked at her. What makes you say that? My father kept that flashlight on his belt. If he was already dead when someone put him in there, the flashlight would have been on his belt. But it's in his hand. He was holding it, using it. He was alive when he went into that chamber, and someone sealed him in. The implications hung in the air. James Crawford hadn't just been killed and hidden. He'd been sealed alive, left to die in the dark. The cruelty of it was staggering. Brennan made more notes. We'll need to examine everything: the flashlight, the logbook, the chamber itself, build a timeline, figure out exactly what happened November 3rd, 1996. I can tell you what happened, Sarah said. Her voice was steady now, cold. My father heard something in this chamber, came down to investigate, found something he wasn't supposed to find. Someone killed him or knocked him unconscious, then sealed him in here, let him die. Then went upstairs and pretended to be shocked the next morning when Dad was missing. Started a search, knowing exactly where the body was. Thomas Whitmore, Brennan said. You think it was him? Who else? He was the only other person at the lighthouse that night. He's the one who found my father missing. He's the one who called the Coast Guard. And he's the one who worked here for 8 more years, walking over my father's body every single day. Sarah's hands were shaking, with rage, with grief, with the realization that she'd been lied to for 23 years, that Thomas Whitmore had looked her in the eye, had consoled her, had expressed sympathy, all while knowing her father was sealed 50 feet away. We'll investigate, Brennan said, thoroughly. If Thomas Whitmore did this, we'll prove it, and he'll face justice. He better, Sarah's voice was ice, because I spent 23 years searching for my father. I became a marine biologist to find him. I dedicated my entire life to bringing him home, and he was here, right here, the whole time. The medical examiner arrived, began the process of removing the remains. Sarah watched them work, carefully extracting her father's body from the chamber where it had lain for 23 years, placing it in a body bag, treating it with the dignity it deserved, the dignity it should have received in 1996. Dr. Crawford, Brennan said gently, you should go home. We'll handle this. We'll keep you updated. No, Sarah's voice was firm. I'm staying. I waited 23 years. I'm not leaving now. She stayed all day, watched them process the scene, document everything, remove the body, finally, bring James Crawford out of the darkness, into the light, after 23 years of being hidden. 23 years of lies. It was over, but Sarah's work wasn't done. She'd spent half her life searching for her father. Now she'd spend however long it took making sure his killer faced justice. Thomas Whitmore had taken her father, had stolen 23 years of her life, had let her search the ocean while knowing the truth. He would pay. Sarah would make sure of it. Her father deserved that much. After everything, after 23 years in the dark, James Crawford deserved justice, and Sarah Crawford would make sure he got it, no matter what it took, no matter how long. The search was over, but the fight was just beginning. Thomas Whitmore was arrested in Sacramento, California on September 19, 2019. He was 57 years old, retired, living in a modest apartment, working part-time at a marina. He'd left Maine in 2004, 13 years ago, started over on the West Coast. New life, new identity almost. Nobody in California knew he'd been a lighthouse keeper. Nobody knew about James Crawford. When police knocked on his door at 6 a.m., Thomas knew why they were there. Hurricane Emily, the foundation damage, the chamber exposed, 23 years of secrets about to unravel. He didn't resist, didn't run, just put his hands behind his back and let them cuff him, like he'd been waiting for this day since 1996. They extradited him to Maine, charged him with murder, first degree, premeditated. The evidence was circumstantial but strong. Thomas had been at the lighthouse the night James disappeared, had discovered the body, had access to the hidden chamber, had motive. The motive was the key. Investigators found it in James Crawford's personal logbook, the one recovered from the chamber. James had been documenting something for weeks before his death. Lights offshore, at night, no scheduled ships, always during Thomas's shifts, always during fog. A pattern. James had written, October 28, 1996, saw the lights again, third time this month, always when Thomas is on duty, always in fog. Someone is using our schedule, using the Lighthouse routine to time their approaches. Need to report this. Tuesday I'll call Coast Guard. But James never made it to Tuesday. He died Sunday night, November 3rd, the night he heard something below, the night he went to investigate, the night Thomas Whitmore killed him. Investigators dug deeper, found Thomas's financial records from the 1990s, deposits, cash deposits, irregular amounts, thousands of dollars over 2 years, no legitimate source. Thomas had been moving drugs, small runs, using the Lighthouse as a waypoint. Boats would approach during fog, during his shifts, drop packages at designated spots on the rocks. Thomas would retrieve them, move them inland. It was perfect. Isolated location, predictable schedule. Coast Guard trusted lighthouse keepers. Nobody suspected. Until James Crawford noticed the pattern. Until James started asking questions. Until James became a problem that needed to be eliminated. The trial began in April 2020. Sarah Crawford attended every day, sat in the front row, stared at Thomas Whitmore, the man who'd killed her father. The man who'd consoled her, the man who'd helped her search. Knowing the whole time where James was, letting her waste 23 years searching the ocean. Thomas's defense attorney tried to argue accident, that James had fallen, hit his head, that Thomas had panicked, had hidden the body to avoid blame, hadn't meant to kill anyone, just made terrible decisions in a moment of fear. But the prosecution had evidence, the smuggling operation, the financial records, the personal logbook showing James' plan to report suspicious activity. The timeline. Thomas had been at the Lighthouse that night, had returned after his shift ended, had been there when James heard something below, had been there when James discovered the hidden chamber being used for drug storage. Most damning was the forensic evidence. James's skull showed blunt force trauma, consistent with being struck from behind by something heavy, like a crowbar, which Thomas had access to, which was standard lighthouse maintenance equipment. The blow hadn't killed James instantly. He'd been alive when sealed in the chamber. The flashlight proved it. He'd been conscious, trapped, left to die in the dark. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness, evidence presented, timeline reconstructed. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with a verdict. Guilty, first-degree murder. Thomas Whitmore showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead, like he'd known this was coming for 23 years. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Before pronouncing sentence, she asked if Sarah Crawford wanted to make a victim impact statement. Sarah stood, walked to the podium, looked directly at Thomas. "You took my father," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, strong. "You killed him, sealed him in the dark, let him die alone. Then you pretended to help search. You looked me in the eye, told me you were sorry, told me you didn't know what happened, and the entire time you knew. You knew exactly where he was. You let me spend 23 years searching the ocean. I became a marine biologist to find him. I dedicated my entire life to bringing him home, and he was there, right there, 50 feet from where you stood." Sarah paused, gathering herself. "I'll never forgive you. I'll never understand how someone could do what you did. But I want you to know something. My father was a good man. He saved lives. He kept that light burning for 15 years. He protected people. And you killed him to protect drug money. You sealed him in darkness to save yourself. I hope you spend the rest of your life thinking about that, about what you took, about what you destroyed. I hope you never have a moment of peace." Thomas finally looked at her, for the first time since the trial began. His eyes were red. Was he crying? Sarah couldn't tell, didn't care. Thomas opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, then closed it. Nothing he could say would matter. Nothing would change what he'd done. The judge pronounced sentence, life without parole. Thomas was led away. Sarah watched him go, felt nothing, no satisfaction, no closure, just emptiness. Her father was dead, had been dead for 23 years. The man who killed him was going to prison. But it didn't bring James back. Didn't give Sarah those 23 years, didn't undo the damage. After the sentencing, Sarah returned to Pemaquid Point. The lighthouse had been repaired, the hidden chamber sealed properly, with cement this time, no mortar, no stones, just solid concrete, ensuring nobody would ever use that space again. The lighthouse was operational, light still turning, every 12 seconds, warning ships away from the rocks. Sarah stood in the watchroom, where her father had worked, where he'd written his last log entry. The room looked the same, except the logbook was gone, evidence locked away somewhere. But Sarah could picture it, her father's handwriting. Here's something below, checking now. She walked down to the storage level, to the spot where the chamber had been, where her father had died. The wall was smooth now, new cement, but Sarah could see where the opening had been, could imagine her father standing here. Hearing sounds, investigating, finding something he wasn't supposed to find. "I'm sorry, Dad," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry I looked in the wrong place, but I never stopped. I never forgot. And he's going to prison. Thomas is going to pay. It doesn't fix anything, but at least there's that." Sarah placed her hand on the wall, on the spot where her father had been sealed. "You can rest now. It's over. You're home." She stayed there for a long time, then finally climbed back up, back to the watchroom, back to the light. It was still turning, still sweeping across the Atlantic, like it had for 185 years, like it would for decades more. The light that her father had kept burning, the light that had kept burning for him for 23 years after his death, marking the spot where he'd been hidden. Sarah left the lighthouse, drove home to Orono, back to her office, back to her research. But something had changed. She wasn't searching anymore, wasn't mapping currents to find her father. He'd been found, brought home, buried properly, next to her mother, together again. Sarah's career continued, but the obsession was gone. She could study the ocean for its own sake now, not as a search tool, just as science. She published papers, taught classes, mentored students, built the life she should have built 23 years earlier. If Thomas Whitmore hadn't killed her father, if she hadn't spent half her life searching. But she never forgot. Every year on November 3rd, she returned to Pemaquid Point, stood at the lighthouse, remembered her father, the keeper who'd kept the light burning, who'd died doing his job, who'd been hidden in darkness but never forgotten, never abandoned. His daughter had searched for 23 years, and finally brought him home. The lighthouse still stands, still operates. Automated now, no keepers live there, just maintenance crews who check equipment, tourists who take photos, people who admire the view. Most don't know the story, don't know about James Crawford, about the hidden chamber, about 23 years of secrets. But the lighthouse knows, the foundation remembers, and on foggy November nights when the beam cuts through the darkness and the foghorn sounds, some people say they can feel it. A presence, a keeper who never really left, James Crawford, still there, still watching, still keeping the light burning, like he always did, like he always would. Even death couldn't stop him from doing his job, from protecting the ships, from warning them away from the rocks. The light turns every 12 seconds, just like it did on November 3rd, 1996, just like it did for 23 years while James was sealed below, just like it will for decades more. A beacon in the darkness, a warning, a memorial for the keeper who heard something below, who went to investigate, who never came back, but who's still there, in the light, in the foundation, in the memory of everyone who knew him. James Crawford, lighthouse keeper, father, hero, gone but never forgotten, lost but finally found, home at last.